There comes a moment on the twin flame journey that feels almost invisible, but it changes everything. It doesn't always come with fireworks or a grand declaration. Sometimes it looks like silence, other times it's distance. But behind the scenes, something deeper is unfolding inside the divine masculine. It's the beginning of a sacred surrender. Not the kind of surrender that means giving up. This isn't defeat, this isn't weakness. This is the moment when he finally stops fighting what his soul has known all along, that his connection to the divine feminine isn't a mistake. It's not something to run from. It's not too much. It's not too intense. It's not a distraction. It's the path. When the divine masculine stops resisting, the energy between the two begins to shift. And not in a small way. Everything that was once stuck begins to move. The fog lifts. He starts to see with new eyes, not just his twin, but himself. And from this new perspective, the journey finally begins to make sense. But this surrender doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of a deep inner transformation, a series of inner collisions between his truth and his fear, his soul and his conditioning, his heart and his mind. So today we're going to walk through what this surrender really looks like, not just on the surface, but within him. What shifts, what unravels, what he finally lets go of. Let's explore what really happens when the divine masculine stops resisting his twin flame connection and starts embracing it from a place of inner truth. 1. He realizes that control was just fear in disguise. In the early stages of the twin flame journey, the divine masculine often clings tightly to control. He wants to control how the connection unfolds. He wants to control how he feels. He wants to keep everything in a neat little box, his emotions, his future, his heart. Why? Because control feels safe, predictable, familiar. He was taught that emotions are risky, that vulnerability is dangerous, that love, especially this intense, soul-shaking kind of love, can't be trusted. So he holds back. He resists. He tries to intellectualize the connection, make it logical, explain it away. He builds walls around his heart, thinking they'll protect him. But the deeper he goes into this journey, the more exhausting this strategy becomes. It drains him. It weighs him down. The more he tries to force things to make sense, the more they unravel. And eventually, he hits a wall. This is where surrender begins, not with a plan, but with exhaustion. At some point, he realizes that his need to control everything is rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of losing himself, fear of not being enough. And when that truth hits, it softens him. He starts to loosen his grip. He begins to see that love doesn't need a map, that he doesn't have to figure it all out before taking a step forward, that the connection he feels doesn't need to be understood. It needs to be honored. So he lets go, not of his feelings, but of the fight against them. And in doing so, he begins to open. That openness may start as a quiet shift, answering a message without overthinking, allowing himself to miss her without guilt, revisiting memories without judgment. But that openness begins to build. And from that space, real connection begins to grow. Letting go of control doesn't mean abandoning direction. It means allowing his heart to guide him instead of fear. And once he steps into that space, everything starts to change. 2. He stops running from his emotions and starts feeling them. For the longest time, the divine masculine believed that feeling too much was a liability. He was praised for being composed, logical, strong. He was told to man up, get over it, or stay focused. So he learned to suppress, to silence, to numb. But the twin flame connection doesn't allow that for long. It brings everything to the surface, especially the parts he buried. At first, this feels overwhelming. He doesn't understand why he feels so much, why memories linger, why his twin's energy won't leave him alone, why he can feel her pain, even when they haven't spoken in weeks. It confuses him, scares him. So he runs. He might bury himself in work, throw himself into another relationship, distract himself with anything that gives him temporary relief. But nothing really works, because this journey isn't designed to be escaped. It's designed to wake him up, and eventually he starts to crack. Not in a broken way, but in a human way. A moment comes when he's alone and the emotions just flood in. Grief, longing, regret, love, all at once. And for the first time in a long time, he doesn't push them away. He lets himself cry. He lets himself miss her. He lets himself feel that ache in his chest without trying to fix it. This is the sacred surrender. It's not dramatic. It's deeply personal. It's the moment he gives himself permission to feel without shame, to be tender, to be honest, and as he does, something softens inside him. He realizes that his emotions aren't his enemy. They're messengers. They're sacred. They're part of his healing. This shift doesn't just bring him closer to his twin, it brings him closer to himself. Because now, he's finally in touch with his own heart. And when a man starts leading from that space, his entire energy changes. 3. He starts facing the parts of himself he once avoided. This part of the surrender is quiet, but it's powerful. Before, the divine masculine avoided certain parts of himself, the insecurities, the guilt, the pain he didn't talk about, the parts he thought would make him unlovable if anyone saw them. He kept those parts hidden, not just from the world, but from himself. But when the connection with his twin grows stronger, something inside starts to stir. Her presence doesn't just bring him comfort, it brings him clarity. She sees him, not just the version he shows the world, but the parts he tries to hide. And even in his silence, even when he's not speaking to her, he can feel that she sees all of him. And that brings up resistance. Because what if she sees the worst and walks away? What if she realizes he's not as strong or put together as he pretends to be? These questions swirl in his head. And for a while, he pushes back. He tries to be someone he's not, tries to outrun the shadows. But eventually, something shifts. He realizes that she's not asking him to be perfect. She's inviting him to be real. And the only way to meet her in truth is to face his own. So he begins to look inward. He starts asking himself hard questions. Why does he sabotage things that feel good? Why does intimacy scare him? Why does love make him feel unworthy? He starts to trace his patterns, his wounds, his walls. And he doesn't look away. He begins to do the work. Not because anyone's forcing him, but because his soul is ready. He might start journaling, meditating, talking to a mentor, or even just taking quiet walks where he lets his thoughts rise to the surface. But in that process, he starts to reclaim the parts of himself he lost. He sees that healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about remembering who he really is underneath the layers of pain. And from that space, he starts to show up differently. More present, more grounded, more honest. This is the divine masculine becoming whole. Not by seeking someone to complete him, but by welcoming every part of himself back home. 4. He begins to trust the timing of the journey. One of the hardest parts of the twin flame path, especially for the divine masculine, is patience. He's used to goals, deadlines, action, progress that makes sense. But this journey doesn't follow a linear timeline. It has its own rhythm, its own divine unfolding, and that used to drive him crazy. He wanted answers, clarity, certainty. He didn't understand why things weren't moving faster, why he felt drawn to someone he couldn't fully be with yet, or why everything in his life seemed to be rearranging without his permission. But when he begins to surrender, his relationship with time changes. He no longer sees the delays as punishments, but as preparation. He starts to understand that this space is sacred, that it's not about waiting, it's about becoming. And that realization takes pressure off of everything. He stops trying to force union before he's ready. He stops rushing the process. He stops comparing his timeline to anyone else's. Instead, he leans into the now. He begins to enjoy his solitude, not as emptiness, but as clarity. He focuses on his purpose, his peace, his growth. He doesn't disconnect from his twin. He just stops needing the connection to validate him. It becomes something he cherishes, not something he clings to. And that shift changes everything. Because when he finally trusts the timing, he stops chasing and starts attracting. His energy becomes more magnetic, more balanced, more aligned. This is where the real magic happens. Not because he's doing more, but because he's allowing more, trusting more, being more. And from that space, the universe begins to move in ways he never expected. 5, he sees that love was never meant to be earned, only remembered. There's a moment in the divine masculine's journey when the striving just stops, not because he's tired of trying, but because something deeper clicks. He finally sees that love, real love, was never meant to be earned. That's a big shift for him. For most of his life, love felt like a transaction. Approval had to be won, worthiness had to be proven, and affection came with conditions. So it's no surprise that when he first met his twin, the same pattern kicked in. He thought he had to become more successful, more emotionally stable, more healed, more spiritual, as if love could only arrive once he reached some imaginary finish line. But the connection didn't ask for any of that. It asked for presence, for truth, for softness, things he didn't know he was allowed to offer. And for a long time, that scared him. He thought he had to perform to be loved. But sacred surrender doesn't ask for performance. It invites remembrance. One day, after enough inner unraveling, enough quiet moments with himself, something inside him softens. He realizes he's always been lovable, not because of what he does, but because of who he is. That realization lands deeply. It shakes him, not in a disruptive way, but in a peaceful one, because he starts to see his twin's love not as a reward, but as a mirror. She's not asking him to be someone else. She's simply reminding him of who he is beneath the fear, beneath the masks, beneath the effort. And that changes how he sees everything. He stops chasing perfection. He stops trying to impress. He stops holding himself to impossible standards. Instead, he starts showing up in his truth, even if that truth is messy, unsure, or still healing. And in doing so, he opens the door to deeper intimacy. Real connection, union not built on fantasy, but on grounded love. This part of the surrender feels like coming home, because it is. Home to himself, home to his heart, home to a love that never left, only waited to be remembered. 6. He understands that union is not the goal, but the expression of inner wholeness. By now, he's different, not just on the surface, but deep in his being. And this final realization lands with grace, not force. Union is beautiful, but it is not the goal. The goal was always wholeness. It takes time to get here. Because for so long, he believed union would fix everything. That once he reunited with his twin, life would finally make sense. The pain would disappear, the confusion would end, everything would fall into place. But what he's come to understand through this process, through all the breakdowns, breakthroughs, silences, and awakenings, is that union with another can never substitute union with self. In fact, it can only reflect it. He sees now that all those times he pushed away the connection, it wasn't about her. It was about him. He wasn't rejecting love. He was rejecting the parts of himself he hadn't yet embraced. And now that he's been through that fire, now that he's met his shadows, felt his feelings, softened his grip, and let go of the fight, he no longer needs union to complete him. He is already whole. He doesn't crave his twin out of emptiness, but out of presence, out of gratitude, out of love, not lack. That changes everything. Because when two whole beings come together, it's not a rescue mission. It's a sacred co-creation, a union built on mutual truth, not mutual need. And this is what sacred surrender brings him to. Not a fantasy of perfect romance, but the reality of deep, soulful partnership. Now he can love her without needing her to validate him. He can be with her without losing himself. He can hold space for her and still hold space for his own dreams, purpose, and path. This isn't the end of the journey, it's the beginning of a new one rooted in clarity, devotion, and truth. And whether union arrives now, later, or in a different way than imagined, he trusts it, because he knows the most sacred union has already taken place within. 7. His energy becomes a safe place for her and for himself. There's something you can feel when a man has surrendered. It's in the way he breathes, the way he listens, the way he shows up, not just for you, but for life. His energy shifts. Before, his presence may have felt unpredictable. One moment warm, the next distant, available, then gone, open, then guarded. But now, there's a stillness in him, a groundedness. He no longer pushes love away. He no longer fears his feelings. He no longer sees his twin as a threat to his freedom, but as a mirror of it. This kind of energy feels like home, not because it's perfect, but because it's honest, solid, soft, true. He becomes a safe space. For her, yes, but more importantly for himself. He allows himself to rest, to feel peace, to feel joy, even in solitude. He doesn't need chaos to feel alive. He doesn't chase highs or avoid lows. He's steady because he's surrendered. He starts doing things that nourish him, not out of obligation, but from alignment. He might meditate more, spend time in nature, reconnect with his body, pursue passions he once abandoned. He starts creating a life that reflects his soul. And when she feels into his energy, she can sense the shift, even without words. It tells her, I'm here. I've done the inner work. I've made peace with myself. I'm not afraid anymore. That energy is magnetic, not because it tries to be, but because it simply is. It doesn't chase, it attracts, it doesn't force, it allows. And in that space, reunion can finally land, not from desperation, but from sacred readiness. Conclusion: the gift of surrender. The divine masculine's surrender is not weakness, it's power, the real kind. Not loud or aggressive, but quiet, unwavering, deeply rooted. It's the moment he chooses his truth over his fear, his heart over his walls, his soul over society's expectations. And in doing so, he doesn't just move closer to his twin, he moves closer to himself. This journey isn't easy. It asks everything of him. But what he gains is far greater than what he lets go of. He becomes whole, present, open. He learns to trust. He learns to feel. He learns to love without conditions. And most of all, he learns that surrender isn't something that happens all at once. It's something he allows, little by little, until the resistance no longer has power over him. So if you're on this journey and you've been wondering where he is or what's happening behind the silence, know this: he's not lost. He's awakening. And when he stops resisting, when he surrenders fully, when he lets love lead, you'll feel it, even before he says a word. Because the energy of a man who's come home to himself is undeniable. And when he meets you from that place, it changes everything.